let's move from buses to trains in a way, because tomorrow Prasa contractor Siyangena Technologies will turn to the Supreme Court of Appeal in an attempt to enforce its security contract. A previous court found this agreement to be unlawful and set it aside. Now the organisation #UniteBehind has joined the case to ensure Prasa's money is taken back. They say there's a new phase of capture, state capture, unfolding at the state-owned entity. They held a briefing earlier today to explain. eNCA's Moloko Moloto was there, and he joins me now. Moloko, it's so interesting. We're talking about the buses, and we know that the trains in many parts of our country have just ground to a halt. Much of it, not all of it, but much of it, due to terrible corruption that has occurred through Transnet, through Prasa. And of course, we saw at the State Capture Commission there was a great detail on state capture at Prasa. But now there seems to be this fight back. And today you were at the meeting of these three civic organizations. What are they saying? What do they want to achieve?
Well, that is correct, Sally. The three civil society organizations, #UniteBehind, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and the Defend Our Democracy, actually were briefing members of the media about the frustrations that they, as people who seem to be monitoring at close range the slow pace of prosecution of people they believe ought to be in court or behind bars up to so far. And they are basically saying that there doesn't seem to be political will, but also from those who are investigating the NPA as well as the Hawks. Among those who were there included Martha Ngoye, who, as we know, was or remains the Prasa's head of legal services. Of course, she's suspended for a separate matter, though. But Martha Ngoye was very central in ensuring that this particular contract awarded unlawfully in violation of legislation such as the Public Finance Management Act had to be revoked. She said she had to put together an affidavit, and we know she also testified before the Zondo Commission. She said she's been cooperating with the Hawks. At the center here, it was Lucky Montana, the former Prasa CEO. What actually we were told was that the Siyangena Technologies had initially been subcontracted, and there was a move to award the entire contract because they were apparently installing some equipment at the train stations to make mobility feasible. And initially, the tender was not issued out for competitive bidding, so it was just awarded to Siyangena, we were told. And at first, the proposal was that the budget would be about 1.2 or so billion rand, but when it was presented to the board, it had suddenly increased without any explanation to 1.9 billion rand. But ultimately, there were phases, and at some point a tender was issued out, but Martha Ngoye believes that it was actually tailor-made for Siyangena because even the way it was captured. And we know now that the High Court in Pretoria, I think in 2020, has set aside that particular contract, Sally, which had ballooned to about 4.5 billion rand. That is why Siyangena Technologies tomorrow will be at the Supreme Court of Appeal trying to reverse that. But let's listen to Martha Ngoye as she was just outlining how some of the people possibly benefited there.
There were gratuitous payments that were made and benefits that were given to Mr. Montana and to one employee within Prasa, And obviously, when the board of Bopo Molefe, after having investigated that, reported the matter to the Hawks in terms of Section 34 of PRECA, which is an obligation that they needed to do as a board. And it's been a very interesting development thus far as to what the Hawks have done as far as this particular investigation is concerned. We do know that there were investigators that were appointed and that were paid by Prasa. Prasa even offered to work with the Hawks and to pay for services of an auditing firm that was going to do, work relating to following the monies that were involved in this particular transaction. Initially, the Hawks agreed to that, but when time went on, the story changed. What we were then advised.
All right, so that's a whistleblower, but it's so interesting that these processes are underway because, and I think it was in the Zondo report that he said he thinks there needs to be a separate commission of inquiry to look into this and what actually went down at Prasa. There's a lot more to be uncovered. So that is Martha Ngoya. She's a whistleblower. But Zaki Ahmed, who's also part of the Unite Behind movement, he's saying they want not just to get the money back, but they actually want to see individuals be found guilty.
So firstly, Sally, Martha Ngoya is saying that she's aware because she's been collaborating, working together with the Hawks as they were investigating. She says she's aware this matter was high on the priority list. However, she says later some of the investigators were frustrated, others were even removed, and suddenly there's this lack of desire to proceed. Now, Zaki Ahmed has said today that they are actually going to be instituting a court action against the National Prosecuting Authority for failing to prosecute because he believes that there's plethora of evidence out there. They don't even need to do much work. Now, Ahmed is now also saying that besides the fact that the authorities must just go and take the money that had been spent, they, as the civil society, are now going to pursue people like Sifiso Buthelezi. You would recall he was the former Deputy Minister of Finance, but before that, he was the chairperson of Prasa. So for the role that he has played, but also former ministers such as Joe Maswanganyi, they are saying they must also be pursued one way or the other because they are in parliament, including the current minister. They really, they don't seem to be happy with the work that he has done. So Zaki Ahmed is saying they are going to be approaching Parliament to make sure that Sifiso Buthelezi in particular gets to be removed. Let's listen to him.
We'll be handing over an affidavit to the Ethics Committee asking for the removal of Sifiso Buthelezi, who is the chair of Prasa, and probably the most corrupt MP in that parliament, apart from one or two others. He is now chair of the Appropriations Committee in Parliament, meaning he can send money where he wants to send it and where people ask for it, his friends. He has to be removed. Dipuo Peters, Zondo once said, ought to be held accountable. She's on Buthelezi's committee. We're also holding Joe Maswanganyi accountable. And we're also going to bring an action against Fikile Mbalula, because just as he thinks he's Mr. Fix-Up, he's certainly not Mr. Clean.
I mean, that's really interesting. And if we look at the context of when the Zondo report, the final tranche, was handed over to the president, he said he needed, I think, 4 months, a number of months to go through it and then present to Parliament what he thinks needs to happen. We know that there are, I think, about 200 people within the ANC who've been named and implicated in that report. And getting a sense from what's being said today about Prasa that people are getting impatient. They want to see action, especially on these big ticket suspected corruption items, as we've seen.
Well, Sally, definitely there's a feeling, especially among those three organizations, that there seemed to be an effort to protect some individuals here because they were obviously dropping names of even senior politicians. For instance, the former President Jacob Zuma, whom they say also received about 100,000 rand, and some of the people closer to him also received millions of rand. So they believe that there's an effort really on the side of those who ought to be investigating and prosecuting to go after such people. But it is also interesting, Sally, you would recall that lately or recently there was a report that the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, in the court papers before court had indicated that actually the recommendations of the Zondo commissions are not binding that much. You know, we all know that the commissions, as they are set up, the president can decide whether to implement or not. But there are some legal commentators who said this one might be different because it was set up as a recommendation of the former public protector. Perhaps it's got more weight. But yes, South Africans surely would want to see the ball rolling in this matter.
Yeah, and I think South Africans are angry about the amount of taxpayers' money that has been stolen. Thabo Mbeki himself saying this afternoon that renewal in the ANC is going to be painful, but if we don't renew, if we don't get rid of the corrupt in our ranks, we will simply not survive. But it also points to corrupt private actors as well, and we really need to look in depth at all of those. Thank you so much. We'll be watching that court case tomorrow. That's Moloko Moloto. Now, still to come.